Okay, so welcome everybody and welcome to another conversation as part of Heart Community Group's Adapting to an Uncertain Future series. Very delighted today to welcome Gemma Hyde, who is a stalwart of 20-minute neighbourhoods. So we're going to start, the structure of today is roughly going to be, Gemma's going to take about 15 minutes or so to introduce the concept of 20-minute neighbourhoods, because you may not all be familiar with that. And she's just told me she's logged off and she's going to log in again. And then I've got a couple of questions and then I'm going to throw it over to you guys. So be thinking about things you're curious about with regard to this topic. And we'll have just kind of a general discussion, conversation. Yeah, so fingers crossed she comes back in soon. What's that picture behind you, Gilly?
Well, it's quite intriguing. I wonder if you look, can you see that there's a reflective surface underneath?
Yeah.
Anyone guess what that might be?
No.
If I tell you that shadow is my hand holding a camera reflected on water.
Right.
So this was a very cold day. It was the top of my water butt.
Oh, right.
Yes, and it left those beautiful ice crystals.
Right.
And it just fascinates me. I like to look at it. And the trouble is my video does keep dropping out, so that might reappear.
Yeah.
So I shall click start video again. Anyway, that's what that is.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I like your curiosity. Thank you for your curiosity. We don't have enough of that in the world.
Although I'd much rather see your face.
Oh, God, that's a top one. There you go.
Right, so Gemma is trying to come back in. Here we go. Welcome back. Welcome back. Can you hear me, Gemma?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. An update knocked out my microphone and then I was like, oh, great. Sorry. Right. My apologies.
No worries. So I've explained the structure. So over to you, Gemma. Let me make you so you can share your screen.
So my plan, just while Kim is doing that, is I do have a few slides to sort of share with you, but equally I don't want to sort of bore you to death with presentation slides. So I will run through those and then we can sort of explore a bit of a conversation about what I do, what the TCPA does, and what we're
you should be able to.
So hopefully that look. You see that?
Yeah.
So, great. Okay, so thanks very much for putting up with my slight chaotic beginning. So my name is Gemma. I work for the Town and Country Planning Association and really sort of pleased to be with you this morning to talk about a bit about sort of what the TCPA does and why we think it's important, but also a bit about 20-minute neighbourhood concept, which you may find of interest. So a little bit about the Town and Country Planning Association. So we have a vision that we would like places to be created and maintained as places where everybody can thrive, and it's really important that when we say everybody we mean everybody, but there is also then that focus on it being fair, and that we need to really look at and embed reducing inequalities in everything that we do. So we want homes, places and communities. And that's from the building that you live in and you sleep in, to the place that you might go to work, the place where you do your shopping, having access to sort of services, and then also that wider community aspect to the way a place works. And we know it's about the built environment, we know it's about the natural environment, and we know it's about people as well, and connections between people. The way that we work is to work at the national level to try and influence planning policy and other policies, which I'll come on to, but also with local authorities who are looking at sort of creating policy and implementing better ways of working for place, and also with other groups who are interested. So we don't sort of stick to working at one level. We do try and work bit of a coalition of the willing sometimes, but I do try and work with lots of different groups to sort of see that we can sort of create better places for everybody. If you've never been on our website, I can highly recommend it. And if you're ever looking for certain sort of documents about certain things, we actually host a lot of free information, and we host a Healthy Places library of TCPA publications, but also wider publications. And we are also a charity. And we do have a membership option. So if any of our sort of things that we're working on, the way that we think resonates with you, then I would encourage you to consider joining, because it helps pay for what we do, which is always an important aspect of life. So we were founded in 1899 by Ebenezer Howard, and he was interested in garden cities as a way of bringing together the best of the country with the best of the city and creating a healthier place from that. And he was quite radical, really. Sometimes we get a bit sort of focused on garden cities as just being perhaps nice places to live, but they are actually founded on some really interesting and revolutionary ideas about land ownership, social justice, beauty, economic efficiency, who gets to own what, and really importantly, long-term stewardship. And we've over the years sort of been closer and further away from these sort of founding principles, and I think at the moment as an organisation we're really revisiting some of these and trying to frame them in a way that makes sense for now. So we've got a project at the moment called Tomorrow 125, which is really looking at actually what do those garden city principles mean today, and how would places look if we actually reimagine them through this lens again. So like I say, it's a sort of powerful history of utopian and progressive ideas, but we do really feel that they provide such a great basis for still thinking about place, and so that's why we carry on as we are. And we do focus on the planning system primarily, but I think increasingly we realise that we have to work beyond planning as well, because places are complex and there are so many other actors involved. But planning matters because what we build now is going to be with us for a long time. So if we're making really poor choices, which you will probably agree with me, a lot of the time we are making really poor choices still about how and where we're building things, then we're going to have to live with those decisions for a long time. So it's important that actually we challenge that and we do better. And we need to be thinking about resilience as well. And we have perhaps some idea of what climate impacts are going to be, but there's still discussion about how bad or how much we need to be planning for. And so we actually need to probably be a bit more imaginative about what we're imagining the future is going to be like, and how we can build in ways that will make sure that what we're building actually lasts in a way that is useful for thriving people and places. And it's about thinking about how all these things join together. So you need actions around individual building design, but also at the neighbourhood level, and how communities are going to function in the future, through to large scale infrastructure. So if we're talking about flood defence and things like that, and energy generation is obviously a huge one at the moment. And overall, we need a better purpose for planning. So at the moment, the legislation and what we have is actually not very strong around the sort of the real why are we thinking about these things, and what is the purpose of what we're up to. there is a focus on sustainability, but that's quite weak and probably isn't strong enough for what we need it to cover. And so we think that we need a better purpose for planning, which is something that we keep hoping that planning legislation will come forward to try and influence. But so far, it's been a bit of a rocky ride politically over the last, well, couple of years, to be honest. So when those opportunities do come forward, what we'd really like is a duty on the Secretary of State that planning should be for the health and well-being of everybody. And that would then draw in a lot of these things that we would like to see come forward. So one of the reasons our environments are important to us is because what we build and the way it's built can have direct outcomes and impacts on individuals, but also on society. And also how things are built can affect how we feel about them and the activities and choices that we make in those places, which then have outcomes and impacts at the individual level, but also for society. So there are a couple of news articles on that slide that sort of link through, and there's lots of links between the environment actions and what then happens as an outcome of that. So the classic is, well, if we're building places that are reliant on people using cars, then one of the direct impacts of that is to do with physical inactivity, is to do with air quality, and then lack of social connection, because everyone just walks out their front door and gets in their car to go to the place that they're going to go, rather than being able to sort of cross the street and have that neighbourly connection with their community. And that's then linked to mental health issues and social isolation. So we know that, you know, where we live is actually a really important factor in determining our health, and that sort of individual determination of our health has a societal impact in terms of what we're having to pay for, in terms of sort of social services and provision, healthcare, etc. And then equally on the planet as well. So, you know, if we're building concrete jungles still, you know, what is that doing for biodiversity and green infrastructure? What are the impacts of that on flooding risk and things like that? So one of the pieces of work that I particularly am focused on is a way of thinking about communities framed around the idea of a 20-minute neighbourhood. And really what we mean by this is just creating places that allow people to live locally more of the time. And in order to do that, it sounds quite simple off the bat. You think, okay, well, yes, we'll need a couple of things. But actually, in order to sort of create those types of neighbourhoods, you actually need quite a lot of, or you need to consider at least quite a lot of things about what's going to be needed to allow people to do that. So one of the big factors is that we need to reduce the amount of travel that people have to do. And by travel, I mean in cars and private vehicles, by creating complete places. So they need to be able to do their basic everyday tasks much closer to home. So that means having access to schools, maybe that the children are going to, having access to local healthy food. So that might be through retail, but it also could be through local food production. It's having access to a certain amount of jobs and opportunities, having access to sort of primary care, or at least sort of depending on where we sort of end up with healthcare, sort of co-located services. So it might not be that you need access to a GP all the time, but it might be that you need access to you know, a decent pharmacy, or a more flexible healthcare space that allows you to maybe pop in and see a district nurse, or those sorts of services. We do need to think about everybody's different needs from those sorts of places, and so it needs to be a place that caters to older people, young people and families, and it does need to have sort of diverse and affordable homes. And those homes need to be of a secure tenure, and they need to be a mixture of sort of private owned and then true social housing, not just what we currently call affordable housing, because it sounds good. And so if we can sort of get all of those sort of items and features into a place, that then encourages active travel. And we keep encouraging that by making sure that those things are close enough together that people, it's an easy choice to walk or cycle or wheel, And we need to make sure that they are sort of connected together in a way that makes sense as well. So you need well-connected paths and streets and spaces, and we need to think about how people move. And often people, and especially women actually, will chain link to go from one place to another. So it might be that they, will do a school run, and then they'll pop to the shop or the post office. Then they might pop in to see maybe a caregiving role to a family member, and they'll sort of link these things together. And so we need to make sure that places work for walking first. Also, we do need to really consider public transport in all of that. So it's actually vital that we provide good public transport that links for people who have more mobility issues, who maybe can't move as far. But also when you do need to go that bit further, it's still an easy and sensible and affordable option to take public transport rather than to take a private vehicle. So 20-minute neighbourhoods, lots of places have sort of been looking at this idea. So you've got Paris, who've got a 15-minute city model. You've got Melbourne, who've got a 20-minute neighbourhood model. Scotland are looking at this quite hard and are thinking about getting it into legislation. In England, we're not there yet. There's lots of talk about it. There are some places that are forging ahead and thinking about it and adopting it. So Waltham Forest is a great example where they are adopting a 15-minute neighbourhood principle into their sort of council strategic policy. And what's great about that is that it doesn't sit in planning, it sits embedded at the heart of everything that they do, which is great for some really innovative thinking about actually other service delivery. Some really interesting things around safety for women and girls, and actually we need to have a safe place in every 15-minute neighbourhood for women and girls to, if they feel harassed or at risk on the street. There's a whole network of safe places using gyms and retail spaces that might be open at night. So you can just, once you sort of get it as an idea, you can then really think creatively around what you might provide in those spaces, in those neighbourhoods, and how it could work. There are some interesting challenges around more rural areas, and that's to be, that might be around, do you have a hub and spoke model? So do you have one, say, a market town that serves a number of villages, and so you focus the facilities or the services and features in the market town and help people get there, and then once they're there they can walk and get to places easily? Or do you think about a cluster model? So you've clustered together 3 or 4 villages, maybe look at how those villages are connected and share the features and facilities and services between them. COVID taught us quite a lot about innovating fast. So there are some interesting models around taking services to people rather than asking people to come to a service. And again, flexible use spaces that allow sort of a better and mixed use of a place, rather than just building one building that's got an exclusive use that maybe 20% of the time isn't used or isn't got enough footfall to be sustained. And there are some interesting challenges that fly in the face of the sustainability model a bit, in that sometimes it's going to be about building more homes in places to support a 20-minute neighbourhood model, because there is going to be a critical amount of people required if you're going to have certain things going on in a place. So it could be, and that's going to be controversial in some places, but it's worth thinking about. It's actually making places more sustainable, not waiting for somewhere to be considered sustainable before you then put in other things. So we've been working on this for a couple of years. We published a guide on 20-minute neighbourhoods for council planners in England in 2021. And certainly as an organisation, we hope to be able to continue to sort of share learning, and we do a webinar series on 20-minute neighbourhoods that's always really popular. I think what's really good about the idea is it's instinctively appealing, so lots of people get it. It's just the implementation part, especially when it's to do it really well, it needs to be sort of cross departments and cross budgets, and you know, it's quite a complex thing to do, and it's about everybody playing their part and thinking more holistically about place, so that you end up with places that are more complete, compact and connected. And this is my last slide. I don't know if any of you have come across something called the Place Standard tool, but one of the things that if you're thinking about creating a 20-minute neighbourhood or retrofitting a place as a 20-minute neighbourhood, is you need to understand what you've got and how people feel about their place and how they use it. And so data is really important. And Scotland developed this thing called a Place Standard tool, which allows you to go to groups of people and they can talk to you about their place and sort of rate it as to how good or bad the level of facilities and things there are. And that will allow you to sort of identify gaps potentially that you can then look to sort of fill. They recently released this one, which is the same tool, but it's got a climate lens on it. And it's quite interesting really, because it's focused on this idea of, you know, what might a net zero place look like, but then it's also focused on how can what might a climate resilient place look like. So it's about reaching targets, but also actually thinking about resilience. So if you've not looked at that before, you might find it interesting as a way of thinking about place and this 20-minute neighbourhood idea, or this sort of more livable neighbourhoods sort of idea. So I think that's my last slide. It is. So I will stop sharing and then happy just to sort of have a chat and see where we end up.
Thank you. That was brilliant. And you already answered 2 of the questions that I'd prepared. So thank you. Which were about the challenges, especially in rural areas, and also I was going to ask you to share some great examples, and I've been doing some, you know, just looking around on the net for great examples, and there are some. So I suppose my first question, so other people on the call will be thinking about your question, is there's so many things that, you know, we can do as individuals, but it's a brilliant concept, and I've thought so ever since I came across it. But I feel very powerless to influence it, as you know, unless I'm actually on the, you know, unless it's my role to be doing that and planning, or you know, I feel like I don't have any influence about my place here where I live. Do you have anything to offer?
I think there are different ways of thinking about it, and I think it is difficult when there isn't that national or local imperative that sets out that this is the direction of travel that we want to go in, and things need to fall underneath it. So then it's about you know, things like guerrilla urbanism, if you've ever come across that, and actually about maybe using or taking really small, sometimes temporary interventions, and sometimes it's about taking ownership of things too. So one of the things that we're interested in is local food production, and actually communities identifying bits of land that exist and are probably under local authority control, but are probably just a bit of grass. And actually those bits of land, so you know, I live in a fairly, it's only a 10-year-old estate, and there are loads of these sort of verges that nobody really cares about. Sometimes you get a car parked on there because they, you know, they use it as extra parking. But actually, you know, if a street or a couple of houses took ownership of that bit of land and sort of tended it and started to grow some vegetables, or even just wildflowers, you know, what could we do with those spaces differently? Equally, it might be about things like pop-up parks and sort of taking over a car parking space. And it's those sort of little things that trying to sort of help people to see the potential of what doing things differently might look like, and that can help sort of gather a bit of momentum towards these things. I think there's an interesting opportunity in neighbourhood planning as well, to a more local level, to sort of try and influence what's important to the place, and sort of filling in some of the gaps that might exist. But yeah, it's a tension that we work with all the time, because yes, ideally we'd love a strong piece of legislation that says, you know, this is what planning can do for health and well-being and for creating more livable places, because we know this is good for, you know, climate resilience, health and well-being, so many things. But yeah, Kate,
Yeah.
I saw a hand.
Thank you. Yeah, Kate.
Thanks, Gemma. Really informative talk there. And just following on from what Kim asked then, which is what I was going to ask, is can you just explain a bit more, do you think, and about the planning process itself? Because I understand district borough councils have some say in the stuff with the neighbourhood planning. Do county councils have any jurisdiction on that? And then and then obviously central government, how does it all fit together, and at what point should we be putting the pressure? In a nutshell.
Okay. So at a local level, your local authority will have a local plan, which will set out, usually for around 15 years, the strategic priorities, and then what we call development management policies that sort of deal with the detail a bit more, about what they want that place to focus on, what they want it to look like, and how it might function. Underneath that will sit the neighbourhood plan. So the neighbourhood plan has to be in agreement with the local plan. So you can't have some like really radical neighbourhood plan, sadly, that goes a long distance away from the local plan. What's interesting about that is that if the local plan is silent on an issue, you can sort of start to weave in, you know, the local plan doesn't say anything, so we would like to talk about this at the local level. And increasingly, we're beginning to see places take that approach, and it works in reverse as well. So above the local authority's local plan, you'll have the national policy and guidance. So where national policy and guidance is silent on an issue, and let's face it, it's silent on quite a lot of things at the moment because it's all up in the air, there are some opportunities to go, well, there is no national guidance, and so based on this evidence that we've gathered, we want to do this. So it sort of depends where you want to focus. I mean, as a national charity, and because we've been around a long time, and because we have the links, that we do try and focus on that national part of the picture. But depending on who's in government and what's going on, that can be really difficult, slow going. And it has been that way for quite a long time. So although we won't give up on that, we don't necessarily, it's not worth sort of flinging loads of our energy at it, because it's, you know, we understand that it's a difficult picture at the moment. So then it's about helping and supporting, from our point of view, helping and supporting local authorities. I think from an individual's point of view, there are opportunities to try and influence any local plan making. So there will be consultations and opportunities to try and influence local plans, and the same for any neighbourhood plan making as well. I think if you really want to try and make a difference, it's the neighbourhood plan level as an individual that it's worth sort of trying to get involved with, and not asking the difficult questions, but actually sort of sometimes just lifting the focus away from we need to build houses and we need more jobs, which has been the focus of planning for a long time. And I think actually a much broader way of looking at place and what people want from place, and how we can achieve that, and the connections. I mean, how places are joined up is so important to how they're going to function. So in a way, it's difficult. I won't lie to you. I mean, there's so many different mechanisms. There's local cycling and walking infrastructure plans. There's all sorts of stuff. In a way, there's a plethora of guidance and policy out there, but we've got a bit of a gap between what we know and what we're still doing. And that's the challenge.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, Gilly.
Hi, thanks, Gemma. That's so interesting. And just, of course, my reaction is yes, of course. Why aren't we doing this? And I think one reason we're not doing it is, of course, I think it was a third of donations to the Conservative Party last year came from the major house builders, and they have multiple meetings with government. Now, I can see that you're not pushing it an open door with the current government, and how frustrating that must be. Given that things may change in a couple of years' time, are you talking? I appreciate you're a charity, and it's important that you are not political in the sort of capital P sense, but at the same time, of course, everything we do is political in a wider sense. Are you currently planning to talk to the other parties, the other influencers who may sooner than we expect possibly be in positions of power to make change?
Certainly, yeah. So you're right, we're not affiliated to any party, and actually we have quite a long history of sometimes not being on the we're going to answer the phone to this group list. So we're at the Labour Party conference and do have links in with the shadow ministers, etc., sort of having these conversations in the hopes that if there were to be a change of government, we would then have some relationships and open doors and some understanding of what, or sharing what we think is good practice and what could be done with the planning system, and therefore what could then find its way through, hopefully, into legislation and practice from any new government.
Yes, good. I'm very pleased to hear that.
Good question. Good question.
I do have another question about it. It makes me think of Kate Raworth and the donut economic principles, and I wonder how much you sort of interlink with that idea.
So, I mean, the initial guide that we published does touch on economics and the donut economic model, but it's very much a sort of exploratory, how could this potentially be applied in the English context? And it is a sort of an opening document. So one of the things we get accused of quite a lot is that we sort of pose more questions than provide answers. And in a way, with the 20-minute neighbourhood concept, you can't get away from that, because it has to be locally focused, because you have to, there are some broad principles that can be applied, but actually once you get into the nitty-gritty, it's got to be place locally focused. So yeah, there are some links. I mean, Cornwall have done lots and lots of work around that sort of economic, thinking about the economics of place and how it all fits together with a sort of a thriving society, which is well worth a look if you've not seen it. So we haven't done anything in particular, but we do appreciate that it all sort of stacks up together. And we're not experts, we're not economics experts, and we're not experts in all of those things that we think should be sort of part of a neighbourhood, but we recognise that if you're going to do this sort of thing, you actually need to bring in that wider coalition, and get everybody to understand that there are shared and there are co-benefits of doing so. And I think that that's one of the things I find almost the most frustrating, is that when I talk to a local authority, so much of this is already set out in their strategy and priorities and what they want. Pretty much every council everywhere has got a priority of, we want a healthier population. Great, okay, so that's sounds like a really simple idea, but actually it's complex, and the wider determinants of health mean that we have to tackle this in lots and lots of different ways, and it needs to flow through everything you're doing and every decision you're making and every strategy and policy. And that's the only way that you're going to sort of build a better picture for that. So it's just sort of pointing out to them sometimes that actually, if you just linked all of these things together, including your planning strategy, your green strategy, you've declared a climate emergency, you've got a health and wellbeing board, can we not just bring it together and talk to each other? And it might not be that every system is going to start working in the same way, but the relationships between those systems need to sort of all be driving in the same direction. So yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great questions. Thanks, Gilly. I've got a couple more if there's time, but just want to open it up to other people. Kate.
Yeah, another question about kind of climate resilience. You talked about that briefly at the beginning, and you had the picture of the kind of flooding. One thing that we're thinking of doing in our local neighbourhood is kind of like a community building resilience audit of some description. What if we get stronger and stronger storms, even hurricanes at some point? How much will the air conditioning of our local community centre cope in a heat wave, things like that. So in terms of those kind of questions, is that how would I find that information? Would that just be the planning department of the council, or how are all those things work?
Yeah, so planning departments tend to be focused on proposals for new development, or that tends to be their focus. So their purpose in life is to review proposals for new development and decide if they fit the policies in place and are fit for purpose. Once something's built, it gets a bit more difficult sometimes to figure out who's looking after it and where that comes from. So some of it will be sort of in the building regulations as to what was required of the system when it was built.
Right.
And then, then other parts will be when something was built, there may have been a drainage report that sort of looked at, 1 in 100 storms or that sort of information. But whether or not that's still fit for purpose 5, 10, 20 years later is probably unlikely, considering what we now know about sort of climate change and the effects of that. We do it's not necessarily something I work directly on, but the TCPA do have quite a large climate change stream. So if it's something you're really interested in, one of our bits of work for next year is focused on trying to support community groups who are looking at climate resilience. So I can certainly try and connect you in to see, they offer information and training, but also I think we're quite interested in developing that sort of direct work with communities a bit more. So that's something we could certainly explore to see if there's a way that we might be able to support you to come up with, what does a local climate resilience plan look like? How might you go about that, etc.
Thanks.
Great stuff. Yeah. Anybody else? Okay. So if it's okay, I'll sort of, as we move towards the close of this, thank you so much, been fascinating. More of a kind of, I suppose, feelings-based question. Something around how optimistic are you? Because when you were, in one of your slides, you were talking about this stuff's got to last us for the next 100 years. I was conscious of a kind of inner wry chuckle, because and those on the call will know we're kind of we're probably much more pessimistic than than you are about where this is all going. So yeah, how optimistic are you, and what keeps you motivated, inspired, passionate about doing this stuff? And do you know, and have we got time? It's a brilliant concept, 20-minute neighbourhoods, given how slow and everything is in terms of getting stuff changed. Have we got time for it?
I think the honest answer to how optimistic am I will probably fluctuate on the day, in the sense that, sometimes it's all so frustrating and so, like you say, so slow, and some of it's scandalous. The fact that we're building homes the way we are at the moment today, right now, lots of people out there are building homes that are scandalously unprepared for what's coming our way and what we know is coming our way. This summer taught us a whole lot, which we should need to learn about heat, then let alone those communities that are flooding, the communities on the coast that are going to need to be entirely relocated. There's no way they're going to survive. So we've got to pick up a whole community and move them. And we know this, but what are we actually doing about it? So there is always a level of sort of frustration and wanting to just put your head in your hands and sort of, think, well, I've got 2 children, and I think, gosh, what are we leaving them to have to deal with? On the flip side, there are people who are talking, working, pushing ideas forward, and do show what is possible. I think at an individual level, it's really difficult. It is really, really difficult. And so, we do need to push for better government at the end of the day, and putting money in the right place. And I think that's definitely a big part of it. I guess one of the things that keeps me going, having said I've got 2 children, is that my eldest is 15. And when I talk to her about my job, she is excited about the ideas and enthusiastic and gets it in a way. And so I do have hope that we are building, a generation behind us who are going to take this forward, perhaps in a more radical way than we've been able to in the last decades. And I think, unfortunately, they'll be faced with the realities of climate change in a way that will help that. So whether or not that's a good thing, I can't decide, because they'll have to face the challenge. But I do think they understand. And so there is that, it's about trying to do my bit for now, and hoping that not that that's enough, but at least if there are enough of us doing our bit, then we can hope that we'll see better decision making and better places out of the other end. But it's tricky, it's complex, it's difficult, and we're all a bit too comfortable, really. It's not quite bad enough for most of us that we're willing to make those difficult behaviour changes and try radical things, because we don't feel the pressure to enough yet. And unfortunately, I don't know that that's going to change until we're faced with it.
And that's why this was a great answer, thank you. And I think reflects the reality, rather than that it changes day by day, and it's tough, but real resilience is needed to just kind of carry on pushing. And that's why in Heart Community Group we're so focused on building community now, almost before the ship really hits the fan.
Yeah,
if that makes sense. So that it's already there. And
actually that relationship point is totally right. It will take communities coming together and having these really difficult discussions. There's an awful lot at the moment about conflict between drivers and cyclists, and actually these are the conversations that you've got to keep having in a way that actually starts to make change. I walked from the station to the office, and I was annoyed by just how the way things are laid out puts different users in conflict with each other. So the cyclists don't stop at the red light because they've been sat at the red light because they're treated like a car, and so they have to wait a long time, and some of them decide that they're going to go before, but then that then puts them in conflict with the pedestrians who think it's their right of way to cross. And the whole thing is just like, it's just not designed to sort of facilitate movement of people. It's designed to facilitate movement of cars.
Yeah.
And actually it's finding a way to have those discussions. And I hate to bring the Brexit word into it, but we've somewhat lost our ability to discourse with each other in a way that's positive and listening. And I think that's a really key part of actually what community groups can do, because it's actually sometimes it's not even about an outcome. The outcome is actually having a positive conversation. That's it. You know, that's all we want, is to have a really good conversation that might eventually lead us to an outcome. But we're not even at the point where we can have that low traffic neighbourhood or whatever it is, because we've got to have a much wider conversation and understand how people's lives work and what they're worried about in order to sort of make that sort of change and be willing to even accept it.
Absolutely. And really listen to each other.
Yeah.
There's not much of that going on at the moment.
No, not without name calling and
yeah,
assuming things about other people because they hold a certain view.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Well, and I just want to kind of thank you for everything that you're doing and your resilience and determination. Yeah, so very grateful for that. Is there anything else you think it might be important for us to know, or you've already pointed us to some really good things? Yeah, what would you want to say in kind of closing that you think is important?
I think there are a number of groups like yours who maybe have been around for a long time. They're not necessarily just popping up, but you're not the first sort of climate focused group to have sort of come to us talking about, you know, what can we do? What is this idea? How can we support it? And I think you should take whatever the word is, not courage, but yeah, take heart. Yeah, quite. No pun intended. But yeah, that should be encouraging, I think. So there are a number of groups that are community groups, because I think there is this vacuum at national level. So I think other people have got tired of waiting for something to happen from the top, and so are driving from the bottom. And I think that that's a really important piece of this puzzle going forward. So I would definitely encourage you to keep having these conversations and to keep sort of engaging people with these ideas. And it might be that you get knocked back, but it's still worth articulating and being open about. And I think other people will join you. Some will get it quicker than others, but you know, it's really important that there is this sort of bottom-up approach to this, because at the end of the day, if something or when something bad happens, it is the community that have got to deal with it first. You know, yes, at some point, you know, emergency services or the government might turn up later to try and help, but initially it is going to be about your neighbour. You know, do you go around and support your neighbour? What can you do together to sort of be resilient in the face of whatever it is? So yeah, I think one of the things at the back of my mind is actually, I wonder if there's some sort of way of connecting groups like yours together and actually sharing a bit of sharing the knowledge, but also just sharing the encouragement and enthusiasm and whining about the challenges. So yeah, I've talked to a few recently, so at the back of my mind, if that sort of comes off, I'll come back to you and sort of see if you want to be a part of a sort of wider discussion at some point, just to sort of show you and to encourage you that lots of you are doing the same sort of thinking.
Yeah,
we often quote I think it's a Rob Hopkins quote, you know, if we wait for government, it'll be too late. If we act as individuals, it'll be too little. If we act as communities, it might just be enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it
Yeah.
kind of sums up what we're all about. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, brilliant. Is there anything other people want to say just in closing here to Gemma or to the rest of us before we sign off here? Yes, Kate.
Just a little extra after hearing the closing comments, Gemma. I'm sure you're aware that the RSPB and other sort of wildlife NGOs are kind of being a lot more outspoken at the moment. Is that something that TCPA are hoping to do? Is that something you could push up the chain, that we need to be a bit more radical in our organisations now?
Yeah, it's always a difficult line, isn't it, to tread between being a thorn in someone's side whilst trying to influence them. So certainly we're part of a coalition of organisations that do try and speak with one voice to government in terms of what we'd like to see. So there's something called the Better Planning Coalition, I think that's what it's called, that the TCPA are part of. Some of that, though, is that we've been waiting for planning legislation to actually come forward so that we can then start to sort of push on it and sort of suggest wording and things. So that's tricky. I think the other thing that we find difficult is that organisations tend to have a goal. So the RSPB or the Countryside Coalition have a certain thing that their whole organisation is focused around and what they're funded to do. And so sometimes having a more holistic view on having one voice to national government is actually really, really difficult. So holding coalitions of organisations together can be really challenging, because if they get their one piece in the legislation, then they're, you know, job done. Whereas some of us might like something else. So yes, and we certainly try not to pull our punches, but it depends, you know, and we're like I said, we're not affiliated to any particular group or political group. So we do try and speak our truth, as it were, and hold to what we, you know, our values and what we think is important. But yeah, how that goes across is variable.
Lily.
Yes, thank you, Kate. That sort of touched rather on my earlier point about the political element. Were you at the Tory party conference?
That is a good question, because it's ongoing, isn't it?
Oh yes, are you? Yes. I
don't know. We have a head of policy who is usually quite across these things, but I don't honestly know if he's there.
I hope you are. I really hope you are. Thank you so much, Gemma. I found that really, really interesting. And it comes, a phrase I've heard recently is, we get what we tolerate.
Yeah.
And that's been on my mind a lot the last few days. And it's like, yep, we get what we tolerate.
Yeah.
So I'm all for grassroots. There is a consultation ongoing in Hertfordshire about cycle and walk routes, and I'll pass that on. I don't know if you've seen that, Kim. Have you? Yeah. So anyway, I'm sort of passing that on as best I can. Thank you, Gemma. Very interesting.
And a great point to finish on. Yeah. So once again, thank you so much, Gemma. Thank you for everybody for coming. I will send you the recording of this when it's finished, and we'll also push it out around the Hart community group people. I know there were lots of people that were interested in coming. So yeah, thank you, Gemma. I hope we stay in touch.
That'd be good. Yeah, and if you could pass me Kate's email address at some point, that would be helpful, and we can see if we can follow up on the climate resilience.
Yeah,
brilliant.
Lovely. Nice to meet you all.
Oh, and Kim, would you pass my email on as well? I'd like to be part of that. Thank you. I should have said it. Bye.
Have a good day, everybody.
Yeah, you too. Bye.
Bye.
Ever so much. Bye.